December 20, 1944, Luxembourg, 6:40
a.m.
A freezing wind swept across the snow-covered Ardennes as artillery echoed through the forests. American trucks crawled along icy roads, while exhausted soldiers hurried to reinforce the collapsing front. 4 days earlier, Adolf Hitler had launched the Battle of the Bulge, catching the Allies by surprise. German panzer divisions had punched deep into Belgium, and the town of Bastogne was nearly surrounded. Inside the headquarters of the U.S. Third Army, General George S. Patton, Jr. stood over a large operations map. Telephones rang constantly as officers rushed in with fresh reports from the front. Among the intelligence summaries was something unexpected. Captured German documents and prisoner interrogations revealed that many German officers mocked two of America's most senior commanders, General Dwight D. Eisenhower and General Douglas MacArthur. They called them car-desk generals, believing they spent the war safely behind maps while others did the fighting. To German commanders, a real general belonged at the front with his troops. Patton certainly fit that image. He was famous for visiting frontline positions, wearing his polished helmet and ivory-handled pistols, inspiring soldiers wherever he appeared. But Patton also knew something the Germans failed to understand. Modern war wasn't won by one fearless commander charging into battle. It was won by thousands of coordinated decisions, moving fuel, ammunition, engineers, artillery, and entire armies exactly where they were needed. At the center of that enormous system stood Eisenhower, directing the largest Allied coalition in history. Now that system faced its greatest test. Bastogne was surrounded. German commanders believed the Allies would need weeks to organize a counterattack. Patton intended to prove them wrong. December 22, 1944, Luxembourg. Snow covered every road as long columns of M4 Sherman tanks, half-tracks, artillery, and supply trucks began moving north. Just days earlier, these same units had been preparing for an entirely different offensive. Now, Patton had ordered nearly his entire Third Army to change direction toward Bastogne. To many military planners, it sounded impossible. Moving one division in winter was difficult enough. Redirecting an entire army meant coordinating thousands of vehicles, fuel convoys, engineers, bridge builders, and medical units across narrow, icy roads without creating massive traffic jams. But Patton had prepared for exactly this situation. Before the German offensive even began, his staff had developed emergency plans for several possible enemy attacks. So when our General Dwight D. Eisenhower asked his commanders how quickly they could relieve Bastogne, Patton confidently replied, 48 hours. Many officers were stunned. Yet while Patton drove the attack, Eisenhower coordinated the entire Allied response. He balanced the demands of British and American commanders, shifted reserves across Europe, and ensured every army worked toward the same objective. Meanwhile, engineers cleared snow-covered roads, repaired bridges, and marked safe routes through the Ardennes. Truck drivers hauled thousands of gallons of fuel and tons of ammunition. Through blizzards, often driving through the night with little rest, the Germans never saw this side of the war. They saw headquarters full of maps and telephones and assumed those officers were far from the real fighting. They failed to realize those headquarters were directing one of the fastest operational movements of the entire war. And with every mile Patton's army advanced toward Bastogne, the German belief in desk generals was about to be shattered. December 26, 1944, Bastogne, Belgium, 4:20 p.m. For nearly a week, the soldiers of the 111st Airborne Division had defended Bastogne against relentless German attacks. Their ammunition was running low, food was scarce, and hundreds of wounded men waited in freezing aid stations. Despite everything, they refused to surrender. Then, through the snow-covered forests, came the distant roar of tank engines. American soldiers looked south. Moments later, the first M4 Sherman tanks of Patton's, the armored division, burst through the German lines, followed by half-tracks, artillery, and long columns of supply trucks. Cheers erupted across the battered town as the relief force finally reached Bastogne. German anti-tank guns opened fire, but the American armor kept advancing. Infantry rushed behind the tanks while combat engineers cleared roadblocks and repaired damaged crossings under enemy fire. Within hours, fuel, ammunition, medical supplies, and food poured into the town. The siege had been broken. For the German high command, the news was almost unbelievable. Only days earlier, they had been convinced the Allies were too slow to react. Instead, an entire American army had changed direction in the middle of winter and reached Bastogne in record time. The victory wasn't achieved by Patton alone. It was made possible by engineers who kept the roads open, truck drivers who delivered supplies through snowstorms, mechanics who kept the tanks moving, and headquarters officers who coordinated every mile of the advance. The battlefield was proving something the Germans had failed to understand. Great generals don't fight alone. They build armies capable of doing the impossible. May 8, 1945, Europe. The guns finally fell silent. After months of relentless Allied advances across Belgium, France, and into Germany, Nazi Germany surrendered unconditionally. Across Europe, church bells rang as soldiers, who had survived years of war, lowered their weapons for the last time. In the weeks after the Battle of the Bulge, Allied troops captured German headquarters, reports, and diaries. Many revealed how German officers had underestimated the Allied command system. They had mocked General Dwight D. Eisenhower and General Douglas MacArthur as desk generals, believing real leaders had to stand in foxholes to win battles. The war proved otherwise. Patton's lightning-fast turn toward Bastogne had been possible because Eisenhower coordinated the entire Allied coalition, ensuring every army, every supply convoy, and every reserve unit worked toward the same objective. Thousands of engineers repaired roads and bridges. Truck drivers delivered fuel day and night. Mechanics kept tanks running despite freezing temperatures. Radio operators, planners, and logistics officers made sure frontline soldiers never fought alone. Patton never answered the German insult with speeches. He answered it by driving the Third Army through snow and enemy fire to relieve Bastogne faster than Germany believed possible, and history delivered its own verdict. Patton became famous for his speed and aggressive leadership. MacArthur became known for directing the long campaign across the Pacific. Eisenhower became the commander, who held together the largest Allied coalition ever assembled. The Germans thought great generals were measured by how close they stood to the fighting. World War II proved something very different. A commander isn't remembered because he stood in every foxhole. He's remembered because his decisions gave millions of soldiers the chance to win.